All right. Welcome to Magic City Books virtual event with Kevin Alexander, Beard Award-winning food writer and author of Burn the Ice, now out in paperback with a new afterword covering the pandemic. And then we also have Rachel Cope, Tulsa's own, even though she left here as soon as she got out of Jinx High School, went to Kansas to school for a little bit, went to Oklahoma City University. There, she got into the food business, started working her way up, and launched her own 84 Hospitality Group. And as we all know, probably here locally, Empire Slice House is what really kicked it off for her. So excited to have both of you on here to talk about something that hasn't been so exciting of late, and that's the restaurant industry. But Kevin, when you started writing this book when you put it together and you saw that there was this golden age, when did you realize that there was a golden age of the restaurant industry and it was happening?
I would say probably, I guess now about 5 years ago, I had started to travel around the country. I was Thrillist national writer at large, covering just sort of writing about big topics in the food industry. And so I started to travel all over the country, and I visited 30 cities. I was eating burgers all over the place, and it just felt like, I started to be able to see the city before I got to the city. You started to be able to tell, okay, there's going to be this neighborhood, and it's going to, feel very cool. And there's going to be these restaurants with reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs and craft cocktails. And there's probably going to be, upscale barbecue place, and there's going to be a ramen place, and there's going to be this, pre-prohibition cocktails. You just started to see it happening. And that's when I really started to explore it, because I was like, this feels like a template, but all of these places are independent. So like, what's going on here? So that's when I really started to dig in.
So when you do this, these articles, were the articles kind of built off to make the book that you have here today? Or was this a lot of original research and piling on?
Yeah, I mean, this was almost all original research. So
Okay.
that sort of planted the seed. I would write a story about, I believe I wrote a 3-part series, I think in 2016, sort of analyzing the restaurant world. And one of the things that I did was talk about how there was the hot new food town. And the hot new food town was like, every year it seemed a new city would be crowned as like the national it place to eat. So obviously that kind of kicked off with Portland, which I saw back in 2006, Austin in 2009, Nashville in 2011, Charleston in 2013, et cetera, up to like Oklahoma City in 2018. And it just felt like you had these similar things. So those stories kind of planted the seed for me. And then to actually write the book, I did all sort of original research, unfortunately, because I'm, naturally lazy. And I would have liked to have just coasted on my old work, but, didn't work out like that.
So you mentioned Oklahoma City and the Plaza District, and that's where Rachel got her start with her business. But Rachel, for you, did you realize in those early days of you working in the food industry after college that you were maybe in the midst of this golden age of the restaurant industry?
Definitely not. And being in in middle America, we kind of catch everything after it started happening on both coasts. And so I think for us, Oklahoma City to me seemed like a blank canvas, but I hadn't really been that many places or seen that many things either. You mentioned that I went to school in Kansas and then ended up Oklahoma City University. Well, it's because I was playing sports. And so most of my life has been dedicated to that. We didn't really allow much for travel in the summers or at other times. And then as soon as I got out of college, I was working a lot. After I fell in love with it, it just was something I wanted to do. And Oklahoma City was where I was. And it seemed like a good place to try, whether that was naive or not. So.
What was it about the business that made you decide, I want to invest my future in this and create a company of my own and build my own restaurant empire?
Well, I wasn't sure if we make it past one, so let's put that out there. I was working for some local restaurant groups. I had worked for some corporate restaurant groups as well. And I mentioned the sports background because I think that's really important to tell you about my competitiveness. It's almost too much at times. You can ask my dad every time I play golf, the odds of me, letting a club fly are probably a 90% chance of that. But yeah, whenever we built the first restaurant, it was kind of a fluke how that even began for us here. I realized that it combined all my favorite things: food, art, booze, music, and people, and then that competitive part as well. And so we started with one, and then it just kind of went from there, kind of snowballed from there. So
Now, Kevin, for you at the time in your book, it starts with kind of the coast. Like she mentioned, it takes a while for things to get in the middle. You see it happen in Portland, San Francisco, New York, LA, and it kind of bounces around. And then you kind of start moving into other territories: Louisiana, Nashville, South Carolina. You start hitting those smaller food. What was it you think that made this food revolution happen in these smaller communities?
I think there's a lot of things happening. For one, the reason that I chose 2006 was it was like such a pivotal year for all these other sort of national extraneous things. So the rise of social media happened that year. That's when 24/7 food media and food blogging. So you saw Eater launch, you saw Serious Eats launch, you saw this things like Daily Candy, which were these newsletters, and Thrillist, and this terrible named one, Urban Daddy. But so they started to write about places in cities, places opening. The whole sort of blogging idea came about. And then there was also new styles of food television. So that was, I think, the year Top Chef launched. It was also the year, the second season, I believe, of Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations. So what you were seeing, all of this stuff at the same time swirling around, meant you didn't have to be in San Francisco. You didn't have to be in New York, which a lot of the times before, it was sort of, you go up, you get a job there, and maybe you bring it back to wherever you're from and you kind of open a place, or maybe you stay there. And so now it was like, oh, there's this renewed interest from a whole new class of people, thanks to Top Chef and all of that. So a lot more people want to kind of get into the industry. They think it's sexier than it is. But with the rise of the blogging and social media and all of this, it kind of wiped away what I call the New York food mafia. And it was essentially, the five families that kind of controlled the narratives, whether it's Bon Appetit and Saveur and Food and Wine, and then, maybe GQ and Esquire, New York Magazine, and New York Times. They really controlled the narrative of food in America for generations. And with the rise of social media, with all these blogs, with all of this other food media, it became much more democratic. And so you were seeing these voices pop up all over the place, and suddenly you didn't have to be specifically in these places to learn. And I thought that was really, really cool. And also that enabled places like Portland to take off.
Now, you're one of these people who is a food writer. So when did that start for you? Did you work in restaurants beforehand? Do you have any food experience? Like, how did you go to becoming a food writer that's winning James Beard Award?
I mean, I worked, I worked in my buddy's dad's Italian American restaurant in high school. I trained at Johnny Rockets in the Natick Mall, but I never got totally through training. I took another job. It's not a big deal. I don't want to get into it. It was at Abercrombie and Fitch. I don't want to brag about it, but I worked I worked the register. I did returns. I could do it all. But I was a bartender at like an Irish pub in Boston. I was a bouncer at a terrible Irish pub in Cape Cod. So I had that sort of experience, but really I was at Boston Magazine in Boston, and in 2008, when the economy cratered, there was a hiring freeze, Boston Magazine, and Thrillist came to me and they asked, they were this fledgling little newsletter business, and they basically only wrote about restaurants opening. And so they said, do you want to be our first Boston editor? And I was like, what do you do? And so essentially it became my beat, and you talk to a lot of, I came up through journalism school, and it was a lot of, you're going to start at this little newspaper and you're going to cover the courts, and then you're going to cover like the police. And then if you make it up to, by the time you're in your 60s, you can write features. And like that was sort of the trajectory I knew about. And so my beat was just restaurants. So I covered, I literally walked the ground looking for, paper on the walls and on the windows, and I would knock on doors, and it was terrifying and it was super awkward. And people didn't know what I was doing. But I learned so much about the restaurant industry. I got to know a lot of these places, and it kind of grew from there. So yes, and that was right around 2008, which was a pretty pivotal time.
Now, Rachel, for you, around 2008, you were just working in the industry. You hadn't really started your own, but 2013 is when you opened Empire Slice House in the Plaza. Why pizza? What made you decide you wanted to venture off and learn how to make pizza and come back and do that in Oklahoma City?
Well, the first idea we got told was terrible, so I had to think of something else. And so I don't know how many people know this story. I feel like it's not very many, but it's such a wild situation that happened for us. So the reason I left working for some local restaurant groups was because I worked for a couple different ones, as I mentioned before, and then felt like they didn't care as much as I cared, or in the way that I started caring about everything. And I saw that there was a contest in Oklahoma City for an old laundromat space in the Plaza District. And at the time, this was in 2012, there was really only Saints, which Kevin mentions in the book, and then the Mule, which were some former teammates of mine at a restaurant group I worked at before. They were really the only spots down there. And then there's a little theater in the Plaza District called Lyric that's really the heart of that district as well. And so this was a tiny 1,700 square foot laundromat, still had like baskets of clothes and stuff in it. And it was a neat little contest where everyone in the city would put their ideas out there as far as what they thought they wanted to build. And so I called a friend of mine that was a chef at the time at another restaurant, and said, I actually Facebooked him because I didn't have his number, and I said, call me, I'm going to change your life, like very dramatically. And anyway, we got together, and I said, what's your style of cooking? Like, what are you good at? And he said, Eastern European. And I said, I don't know what that is. He said pierogies, and it'll be fine. I was like, well, I don't know about any of that, but I do front of house. I'm a bartender. I know how to manage people. I can build a business plan maybe. And so I'll do that, and you do the food. So we built a cafe idea, made it to the top 5, but they were like, yeah, we like you, but we don't really like that. So I go to Austin for the first time in 2012. I don't know why it took me that long to get down there. And I went to a little pizza place, not so little, but Home Slice Pizza, which is on South Congress. And as I'm sitting there at the bar top by myself, waiting for a friend to come into town, I'm sitting there, I'm looking around, thinking about the neighborhood, and I'm like, man, this seems like Plaza maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And I loved it. And I wanted it to maybe be more bar driven, but because it's a pretty family oriented space, the way the full service restaurant's laid out. But I came back and I told my friend, let's do pizza, and we're going to find another place. And I'd worked at one pizza place that was not New York style pizza, and I definitely wasn't cooking. But the landlords at the contest, the laundromat space, said, hey, the person that won the contest can't come to terms on a lease. Do you have any other ideas? Because we really like you guys, think you'd be a good fit, but we don't know about that European cafe deal. And I said pizza, but we didn't know how to make pizza. So we did one taste test for them, and they were like, yeah, maybe try again in a month. And then, that was like our last chance. So I found a place in San Francisco. Kevin mentions this in the book. I took all the money, that my family had to give to me, and flew myself to San Francisco to go to Tony Gimignani's International School of Pizza, and was the only female in the class. And there was a gentleman from China. There was a guy from Canada. There were 2 guys that worked in a supermarket from somewhere in California. I can't remember the name of it. And one other person. And I again, the competitive part, I wanted to know how to do it myself. And Tony was really kind to me, kind of took me under his wing and showed me how to make pizza. And I came back and told my friend everything I knew. And Empire was born shortly after that. And to this day, we still try to better our food. I'm obsessed with continuing to try to make it better, but that's how we got into pizza. So long story.
No, not long at all. So Kevin, what is it that draws you to people like Rachel in the food industry? Because your book isn't like, some people might think they see food writer and they think, oh, this is going to be descriptions of the food and everything, but really you're telling the stories behind the restaurants and the people who did it and all that. So what is it about that really brought you into this world?
Well, I mean, you kind of said it. I love food. I love that sort of thing, but I'm not as interested in reviewing food. I love the people behind it. And so people's stories always kind of fill me up. And that's really what made me passionate. I just wanted to know, I just have this thirst to find out what people are about. And talking to Rachel, Rachel and I were joking about this, but I came in to Oklahoma City. I did some interviews. Then I went to Pawhuska and I did, some Pioneer Woman things. And then I came back and I did more interviews in Oklahoma City. And Rachel and I, it was the last interview of the day. I was sort of burnt out and we sat there, and her passion and just like how, fired up and driven she was and entertaining, and how she was a thirst for knowledge too. It wasn't just like I was interviewing her and she was kind of interviewing me. She was like, well, where have you been? What about that? Like, what do you think about this place? Like, taste that drink. What do you think of that drink? And all of a sudden, and it was this, we were really engaged, and it was funny. And she was like, well, what are you going to do after this? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I think I'm just going to go back to my hotel and go to bed. And she was like, all right, well, drop off your car and I'll come pick you up. And so what ended up happening, was we were out for, I don't know, Rachel, what, 7-8 hours?
I lost track.
Yeah. Drinking whiskey and going to different places and listening to music and just talking about all sorts of things in the food industry. And those type of nights are why, like, I do it. It's to get lost in sort of a scene with someone where you're connecting with them and you realize that, like, you don't know where this night's going to go. I remember I was at Death and Company, which is a cocktail bar that I write about in the book, in New York. And I was with a friend of mine who's who was one of the original bartenders there, named Joaquin Simo. And what we did is we went back there when they shut down, and it was like 2 a.m, and we were there until 5 a.m, because that's when the party started, when they locked us in. And I remember, I think my wife called me at sort of like 4 a.m, and she was like, where are you? And I was like, I'm doing research. And so it was that sort of those sort of nights and those sort of feelings. I got to stage at Le Pigeon, and I got to kind of do all of these kind of cool things, but it's really about connecting with the people and learning their stories. And it goes from there. The food is, on the side. It's really about the people and the places.
Now, we do have a viewer question. I want to ask it too. It's for both of you, Kevin and Rachel. What are the favorite food traditions from your childhood / growing up? And how have they shaped you in your approach to food today?
Oh, wow. Rachel, you want to go? Time.
I would like to tell you about some foods I ate as a child. There was my mom's famous tuna noodle casserole, which was Velveeta with egg noodles and canned tuna, solid dish.
A lot of nuance.
You know what? I think the best way to go about is my parents always made comfort food, mom or dad. And that's kind of how we approach what we're doing now. Like, we don't make super fancy food. We make food that we think makes people feel good, that's affordable, and that we like to eat. And so for me, I don't know, I didn't really grow up, again, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't really get to ever travel New York or to Los Angeles. Our family trips, I grew up with, I'm the oldest of 3 kids, and I was, again, playing sports and kind of, just running around a lot. There wasn't a lot of that, but our parents always put a lot of effort into what they were making for us. And even though it was simple, I still loved it. I actually made my dad's like enchiladas the other day just at the house. And those were literally canned chicken with rotel and Velveeta again. And just enchiladas and cream of mushroom soup. And it was, I don't know, it's not very fancy. And that's kind of how I take approaches. I don't take myself too seriously. And at our restaurants, we always call them hangouts because that's really what they are. And they're very social. And my mom is sort of the hostess with the mostest with all the people that she ever had over to the house. And there was no event too small. It was always perfect and the most fun. And so I think I take more from maybe that kind of side of it than maybe the food part that I had growing up. But
I think you're downplaying the fanciness because you said there was cream of mushroom soup and Velveeta and rotel.
Trifecta. Yeah. I have that all in my cabinet right now too. So.
Yeah, I do too. But so for me, I actually was born in Texas. Not to alienate anyone.
I didn't know that, and so I'm gonna have to get off this call.
Yeah, I know. It looks like everyone hung up. Well, that's but no. So I kind of came up really loving sort of, Tex-Mex. And I'll never forget, I was with my mom. We were supposed to go, because my family is originally from Massachusetts. We were supposed to go up north for Thanksgiving, and I was sick. And so just my mom and I stayed home. And instead of Thanksgiving dinner, I had her make steak burritos. And so that was the food for me. It was steak burritos, guacamole. I was obsessed with guacamole as a child. I couldn't understand. It was like the green, like how these weird avocados, and then you mash them and it kind of looks gross, but it tastes delicious. And then like queso, just eat it. I mean, you want to talk about Velveeta and rotel. I mean, just dump a whole thing of that, throw it in the microwave, whatever, and let's go. And I remember going to the original, not to brag again, doing a lot of bragging here, but the original Chili's was in my neighborhood. And so, getting the chicken tacos there, having an IBC root beer that you pretend looks like a real beer when you're 7. Those are the memories that I have. I really love. So yeah, for me, it was kind of like inflected in Tex-Mex a little bit.
Since you started researching and working on this book and everything, what foods did you learn that you really loved that you hadn't had before?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the main characters in the book, or a few of the characters, are Anjan and Emily Mitra, who have the Dosa restaurant in San Francisco, and that's a South Indian restaurant. And so I'd always loved Indian food. Didn't, had kind of come from the place of where a lot of people come from, where it's like tikka masala and butter chicken and a lot of those sort of things, naan. And as part of the research, I went around the Bay Area with Anjan, and he would take me to different places, show me all of the different styles, and like blew my mind with the nuances of Indian food. There's so much that still we're not getting in America. The fact that theirs was South Indian as opposed to like traditionally North Indian, or what a lot of people know, which are, actually usually Bangladeshi folks creating those restaurants. But just the level of the spice and flavors and what you can pull, and how each bite, you had to make sure that there was a certain amount of like this sort of spice on it, and okay, we're gonna put this sort of curry on it, and now like eat it like this, and then wash it down with this. And I got obsessed with it. So that was really like, I became obsessed with looking for great Indian food, and I still feel like we've only begun to scratch the surface there in America. There's a lot more that I think we could do, and I'm excited to see that sort of a thing.
Rachel, for you, as you got out and started, because you've mentioned a couple of times now that you never really experimented with food younger growing up. It was pretty traditional, middle class Tulsa household type thing. But you've ventured out and you've gotten into the world, and then you started opening new restaurants under different, burger, ramen, everything. How did that come to be? Did you fall in love with certain foods as you experimented? How did all that play out for you?
So the pizza place was the first restaurant. I mean, like a lot of people, I grew up eating pizza. And so I kind of had some idea of what I thought was good and okay. And that seemed like a good thing for us to try out of the box. It wasn't until, we have a very talented chef and partner and friend, brother at this point, Jeff Chanchaloon, who is the executive partner and chef at our ramen shop called Goro Ramen, and formerly a restaurant called Gun Izakaya, which we actually just moved Goro from the plaza into the Paseo district here in Oklahoma City, and took kind of favorites from the both menus, which was a COVID situation to have to do that. But I would have never done ramen if it wasn't for Jeff. And so that was our second restaurant that we ever built, and that was in July 2016. And I really was just betting on him. I thought his food was fantastic, even if I couldn't quite put my finger on what that meant. And I hadn't had that much ramen outside of what we eat as kids here, we all say that. And there was really, I guess, I don't even know if Tamashi, which is really the only other ramen shop in town, was open at the time, but I knew Jeff. He'd been friends with my little sister for, I don't know, at this point, they've known each other for probably 10 plus years. And he's a fantastic graphic designer. And so I had kind of hit him up to help me make some graphic design stuff for Empire. And this was before I even opened Empire. I just was checking in with him. He had a food truck, which was all the rage at the time, as kind of Kevin mentioned. And it was really cool here in Oklahoma City because we're always about 5 or 6 years behind the craze that happens everywhere else. But he had a really cool ramen truck, and it was on Eater, and I kind of followed it. I actually tell him to this day I didn't really like the ramen on the truck. It was a fish-based broth, which isn't my favorite, but he has a chicken-based broth at Goro, and it's amazing. So again, we did some pop-up dinners, and before we actually did a brick and mortar together, and I did the bar, and he did all the food, and we sold ticketed dinners. And it sold out like 10 in a year. And then a space became available in the plaza that was like the right small size, like 1,600 square feet for a ramen shop. And that's how that happened. But then after Goro, we did a Mexican restaurant. And I had some chefs that had been working with me for a long time. And I had worked with at some other restaurants over the years. And they made really great food. And they were Mexican, they were Guatemalan chefs, and I thought I was kind of helping them highlight I really wanted to be like very traditional with it, but at the time, I guess I didn't really realize that the way that would be viewed when I presented their food was sort of like, like whitewashing a little bit, and I had never thought that before. I thought I was helping them. And so that's kind of maybe a tangent from your question, but what I also realized during that time was we were trying to stay so traditional with some of our food there in the beginning, and people didn't really like it. As Kevin mentioned, in Texas and Oklahoma, there's a lot of Tex-Mex. And it wasn't until almost a year ago that we finally gave in and put liquid, queso on the menu. We only had queso fundido, and it was like my mission to drive that home and say, you're going to love this if you just try it. And so that was kind of a learning curve there. And for, Mexican food in general, I like it. I don't know if I ever really had a passion for it. And the people that helped us build that along the way aren't with us anymore. And so I learned a lot about that along the way. I told myself that one of my 3 criteria moving forward when we build something is that I want to be believable. I think that's so important. And I liked the Mexican food, but I don't know if I loved it. I love what we're doing there now because we kind of let go of that traditional part of it. And now it's a fun party place, has great margaritas. The food is the best that it's ever been for the clientele that we have. And so that's something I kind of learned along the way. And then the burger shop, maybe that was inspired by your burger article, Kevin. I just really wanted to
Big credit
to build some burgers. But that was kind of, we built a food truck. I bought one, and then for catering, and then we weren't really using it, and I tried to sell it. No one wanted to buy it, and it sat in this parking lot for like 6 months. And I was sitting on my couch, this is a few years ago, and I was like, I've got to do something with this truck. And I had worked on a food truck before, and so I knew it needed to be simple and efficient, and it needed some kind of something that made it unique, either the way it looked or what we were serving. And there was a food truck in Portland, I think it was in Seattle actually, called Maximus Minimus. And it was this food truck that looked like a pig. Like if you Google it, it had like a snout on it, and it had this crazy, like, I don't know, pig hair. What is hair on pig? And so I told my dad, who works with us, I said, I want to put a mohawk on this truck because it's going to be called, Burger Punk. And it's this punk rock burger truck. And he looked at me like I was crazy, but we got it done. And I fell in love with the burgers on that truck. And then it eventually became a brick and mortar. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's been a little bit of everything, but really what I want to always do is be unique, and be believable about what we do, and have a passion for that, and also fill a niche for where we live, and be accessible for the type of clientele that we have here. So again, long answer to a short question, but yeah.
That's all right. I'm starting to get some questions piling up over here about the current climate. We'll get to that in just a second. But before that, about midway through the book, Kevin, you talk about Roy Choi and what he did with Kogi, and then a couple chapters later, you venture into rural Oklahoma, and you mentioned this a little bit ago when you went up to Pawhuska to see Ree Drummond and her operation, what all was going on, and you kind of share her story in the book. But for you, what was it like venturing up to the tall grass prairie area of Oklahoma and seeing what was going on there with the pioneer woman?
Well, it was really funny because I drove in there, and at the time, because now she has her own hotel or whatever, but at the time there was only sort of this one motel-ish spot in the city, and I booked a room, the horse racing themed room, naturally. And I was the only guest, and I walked in, and the guy said, are you here for the movie, for Ree, or for the cattle show? And I was like, for Ree. And then I was like, well, what's the movie? And, it was I think the Flowers of the Killer Moon, which was the David Grand book. I think, I believe Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio are maybe working on that. So there had been people scouting there in the weeks prior. So I got in my room, and they were the guy was like, well, look, the town shuts down at 8, and if you want a drink, I would suggest going to the gas station and getting some Budweiser and some snacks, because you can't get anything after that. And so I was like, noted. So I went and purchased my Budweiser and my snacks, and but yeah, and then I basically spent the whole day or a couple days just wandering around the town. I ate all my meals at the Drummond's Mercantile. I just tried to talk to all the local folks about what was happening there, and how they felt about how this town, and it was really, really interesting, because it was sort of like, it's essentially their family has like the Drummonds have like a fiefdom. It's like, it reminds me of sort of, in these old society, like where they own the majority of that town. And, and it's not just her husband, their family, the Drummonds, are one of the great, cattle ranching families in America. And I think there's something like in the land report or whatever that there's something like the 14th biggest landowners in America, and they had just quietly and sometimes not quietly bought up almost all of downtown. And they were, at the time I was there, you know, they were refurbishing things. They were going to open like a sort of reception area for weddings, and they were going to do like a steak and saloon place and a cocktail bar, and they had the mercantile, and they were just going to open this hotel. And it was so funny to kind of, no one wanted to speak on the record at all, for fear, you know, of maybe saying something wrong and pissing off the Dromans. But they were all sort of like, you know, we're so thankful, this is great, like it's bringing all these people into the town, like I can Airbnb my place during the summer, and we get like, you know, people coming in from all over the place, and I make all that money. But it's, you know, it's a little weird. There's just one, you know, it's just this one family, and it's just this couple, and they kind of own all of it. And you know, and I read about this in the book, but there was an old sort of like a Target type of store in town that Ree had featured in one of the early versions of her show, and she had gone shopping for things there or whatever. And now she owns that place, and just to keep it's closed, but she just keeps all of her stuff there. You know, so you see this giant, huge warehouse, and it's just for her stuff. And I thought that was such a, you know, such a bold example of just seeing a place like this. But there, she was really on the cutting edge of what you're seeing now with like the Gaines family in Waco, Texas. I mean, that's obviously a bigger city, and there's more going on, but it's these people who become these celebrities, and they basically put their stake in the ground in these places that are either towns or they're, you know, smaller cities or whatever. And they're like, we can control this whole thing. We're the only game in this place. And they essentially turn these places into, you know, tourist destinations just to see the one person. It's like Dolly World, Dollyland, or whatever. Dollywood. Yes, Dollywood. And it's, I just find it completely fascinating. So I wanted to, it was really important for me to include people like Ree, people like Guy Fieri, and some of these other stories of people that weren't necessarily aiming directly at food, like the traditional kind of like hipster foodie generation. You know, there are these people that have created these huge empires, and they're basically going for crowds that aren't the same, and they've been very smart about it. And Ree's one of those people. She's very, very, and she grew up in Tulsa, I believe, right?
Bartlesville, I think,
Bartlesville,
right? Yeah,
which
just
is
north of Tulsa.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, and was like the daughter of a doctor, and sort of grew up upper middle class, and went to USC. And so I always found it fascinating that it was sort of like she painted this picture of, you know, just this cowboy woman raising her kids and whatever. And, you know, it's like a USC marketing major, the daughter of a doctor. And anyway, and it's just, she managed to thread this needle that I don't think a lot of people could thread. And I find that sort of a thing absolutely fascinating.
Now, to jump ahead, in your book, you kind of argue, you lay out a theory on why the golden age of dining and restaurants was that time period. But I think that with your new afterword in the paperback, the pandemic has kind of established that we have ended that run. Like, you know, one way or another, that run is over. Now it's a new world for restaurants. And first, I think, surviving and then moving forward from there. So the first question I have from an audience member, which mirrors what I was going to ask, is, beyond the shutdown, how has the pandemic affected both of your careers?
Well, I mean, do you?
I don't know yet. You know, I told myself when all these restaurants started that, I mean, my first restaurant happened when I was 29, 30. Well, no, I don't know how old I was. I'm 35, as someone reminded me
Make it
the
up.
other day. So I thought I was 34. So I've been very upset for a few days now. But yeah, I wasn't sure if any of it would work out. I thought I could like make it happen, and maybe we have in a sense. But I was always prepared for starting over if I had to. I thought that I had time to do that, and maybe that's where some of the fearlessness came with some of the risks that we've taken kind of over the years. But recently, I don't know, it's been different. I truly believe that our team can figure anything out. We keep getting thrown these curveballs, and there's literally times, sorry to whatever of my team, whoever's listening from the team, that I'll just get in the car and just like yell alone and just try to like, it's just so frustrating that we're all doing our best, and we're all keep adapting, and everybody keeps telling us it's going to be okay, and hang in there, and do to go this and do to go that. And man, what a challenge this has been for us. I will say in our favor, this kind of goes to the youthfulness of our group. I think that a lot of the thoughts that we're putting in play right now, as far as quick service restaurants, technology driven, less contact, using social media, some of these things that Kevin kind of mentioned earlier, those are things that we built our brands on in the first place, whereas some of the older guard is just trying to figure out how to add those things into what they were already doing. A lot of the styles of food that we've been creating over the years, whether it was on purpose or not, kind of like I mentioned, they're affordable. I've told investors before pitching them, this is recession proof. No matter how much money people have, they're going to be able to afford this product. And, you know, you can use an Empire Pizza as an example. For $23, you can get a 20-inch pizza that would feed a family of 4 easily, possibly a family of 5. And I challenge you to go to McDonald's and feed your family a 5 for less than that, of something that I can name every ingredient in and every person that made that, every part of that. And so I'm proud of that part of our restaurants. We are shifting a lot right now and putting some of these thoughts into play faster than maybe what we thought would happen, because we're forced to. But also I was always scared of debt. I don't remember who told me that, but thanks. We ran on a lot of cash in the beginning. We took investor cash, and that's how we built our restaurants. I didn't take loans. I actually thought I couldn't even get any. There's times now that I'm like, can I get a loan? And they're like, yes, you guys can leverage this and do that. And I'm still learning a lot of that. I was not a business major. My parents are all fantastic, and I ask those people around me for help a lot, but it's tricky. It was really interesting in the restaurant world before. Everybody kept everything so tight-lipped. You know, there wasn't a lot of sharing, especially with the younger crowd like us and the older guard. They were like, you know, you guys, like, what, you figure it out. Like, we walked through the snow with no shoes on and carried our books and ice and all this. And I'm like, well, okay, thanks, I guess. And maybe that's where I look to other people outside of Oklahoma City. And when Kevin and I first spoke, I had traveled a little bit, but I read a lot. And I see articles about, you know, David Chang's kind of a big hero, I think, for a lot of the younger restaurant people. And there's a lot of other people who fall within that now as well. But a lot of the people that I drew inspiration from were mentors. They weren't even people I knew. And anyway, kind of getting to the end of this thought, I don't know what's going to happen. I know that we're making the best moves that we can. A lot of restaurant groups in the beginning, I think we were one of the quickest to act as far as going, this is crazy, I don't feel comfortable. So we literally closed on a Sunday. We took one day off to figure out how to convert all of our stores to to-go only, and what stores could even do to-go only. Because at the ramen shop, we had never done to-go. That was like a staple. It was like a thing. It was like a soup Nazi thing. It was like, we're not doing to-go. You have to eat here. You can't have it that way. And all of a sudden we were like, just kidding, come eat to-go. And we weren't really sure how that was going to work out. And so we took that day off. We opened on reopened on March 17th and tried that, and kind of throughout this time period, you have some stores that have combined and some that have closed. And then we just kind of battened down the hatches on a few and waited. And we've just recently started reopening some of these stores. And a lot of that was because we feel like we have a better handle on COVID precautions, things that we can do in-house and things that we need. And a lot of our staff is ready. They were not ready before. We weren't ready before. I don't think I started eating out at restaurants until about 2 months ago. And it's because I felt like I needed to get out there and experience it so that I could lead it for our crew. Because I knew that staying closed forever was not an option. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, but if the restaurant career doesn't work out, I did start learning music production. I don't know if that's very lucrative, but it sounds really fun. And then I keep telling Kevin that we should write a book or something like that. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of myself, I just think about the industry differently. You know, it's like all of a sudden I've written about all these folks. And then when I was calling them up to do the new afterword, it was like it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't even trying to be objective. You know, I just cared about these people that I had spent all this time with. You know, and Rachel and I talked for a while, and she had just opened the place in Tulsa, and she had, you know, and she was looking, and I remember she was talking about her dad looking out the window and just feeling uneasy about like this investment that they just made, and talking to Gabriel Rucker, that shutting down the Pigeon for the first time in 14 years. And Dosa is gone now. You know, there is no Dosa. And these are real things that are happening. And it suddenly made like a lot of the fluffier aspects of my food journalism career just seem kind of dumb. You know, it was sort of like, well, why am I even like thinking about writing some sort of, you know, list of whatever the best burger places are in Omaha, when like all this other stuff matters, and none of these places might be open in a little bit. So it really made me focus down. I ended up actually leaving Thrillist right around COVID time to help, you know, obviously with my family. I have 3 kids, and you know, and just kind of recalibrate. But it part of that really was that it didn't seem important. But you know, right now I'm working on a book with a chef, and I'm obviously, you know, doing some things around this book. But when I'm doing journalism now, I want it to be more meaningful and impactful, and less sort of silly, and like it needs to be a little bit more consequential. And I think so from that perspective, it's like I'm only a writer. I don't have any other skills, not even music production. Was pretty good at retail, not gonna lie, great at the register. But I just, you know, it's just I'm gonna keep telling people stories. But the stories might change.
Can I add? I wanted to say one thing real quick. Somebody kind of brought something up the other day about how we're handling things, and it wasn't necessarily positive or negative, but you know, my job as the leader of this group is to only show the positive parts. There's a lot of negatives that are going on right now. It's hard to handle a lot of those things and not tell even our closest people in the office or whoever what's going on, because you don't want to scare them. But I feel like I wish I present this very like positive picture, and I am a solution oriented person, but it doesn't mean that we'll make it out of this unscathed or have. And so above all, I think the biggest burden and also privilege that I've had this entire time is looking out for our team. And it's been really difficult. All from any position all the way through the hospitality group is feeling like this again, not a privilege, but I feel like I'm supposed to take care of them as well as try and take care of yourself at the whole time. And a lot of those people that we used to turn to are also struggling. And so it's been difficult. So even though I just want to say, even though I present this very positive thing, it's not that there's nothing negative happening kind of behind the scenes. But I think that's important to know as well. So
I'm going to try to morph. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to try to morph a few of these questions into one, and it'll go for both of you. With everything that's happened in the world with the pandemics and with the restaurant industry as a whole, what are you kind of thinking you're going to see come in the future with the industry as a whole? With the innovations that have popped up, we've seen people change the way they do games. Curbside has become bigger. Parklets. We've seen all these little mini innovations and things that have occurred across the industry. And then we've also seen the discussions of inequality in wages and the marginalization of minorities, and the struggles to continue operating with factors such as rising rents, unstable supply chains, everything. What do you guys foresee for the future?
I'll pop in first. So I think, part of this book was that I saw that there was this glorious culinary revolution, and it had to end. It wasn't sustainable, for all of the reasons that we talked about. It was like there were 100,000 new restaurants in America, and like over the past decade, and there was this back of the house labor crisis, and immigrants, we were witnessing reverse immigration that was depleting the ranks, and the Me Too movement, helped illustrate the fact that chefs were mortal and in some right nefarious, and farm to table became this buzzword that was meaningless, and consumers, kind of spoiled by fantastic options and convenience, like ended up turning restaurants into, like, I don't know, hip food-based Instagram hashtag scavenger hunt checklists. and you just saw all of these things. So something had to give. So from like sort of a plus side of that is that there was going to be some, bloodletting. And anyway, in order to be a healthy, sustainable restaurant ecosystem, I would have said, we need to lose 30% of the restaurants. It just wasn't going to work the way and that was sort of the point in the end of the book, that this was glorious and it's lovely that we've kind of changed the way we think about food. This isn't sustainable. So what comes next? So obviously the pandemic made that much worse than I could have ever imagined. I had pictured a recession, and not obviously a pandemic. But now I think what we're going to see, I think that there's going to be a period in which it's sort of like fallow, it's and obviously, like, people need to build income up, and they need to have capital, and people are going to be scared to invest in things, and you see that at any time. You saw that in 2008, but then, like, I honestly think what we will see will be a much healthier ecosystem for restaurants. I think you'll see more stability in the back of the house because there will be less restaurants. So you'll be able to keep cooks for longer and have them more stabilized in those positions. I think you're going to see more of a professionalization. I mean, a lot of that's what we're talking about. The problem with the restaurant, it was the Wild West, and it was highly unprofessional, and there's a sexiness and there's an art to that and whatever, but that's, as we've seen many, many times, that's not a healthy workplace. And so you're seeing sort of, through fits and starts, the professionalization side of things change. And I think that's long been needed. I think also we're starting to see people truly care, from the checklist dining that was going on. You look at an eat or heat map, and then every time you go out, you try a new place, and you could, because there are all these places. There's going to be less of that. There's going to be much more of, you have your 3 or 4 places. It's going to be the return of the regular. And I think that's healthy. And if you talk to, restaurateurs like Rachel, like, the people that kind of fill you up and make you feel good are the people that are coming into your place repeatedly each week, and you get to know them, and you get those connections. And that's really, part of, like, the good part of the business is understanding that these independent restaurants are so much more part of the community than you'd think. And that's, I think, when we get to the other side of this, and we will, and it's going to suck, you know, it's like there are going to be a bunch of places that close that you could never get a reservation for on a weekend, and you thought that they were the most successful, and all of this stuff, and it'll be hard to understand, and it'll be unfair, and in some ways we just have to come to terms with that. But when we get to the other end of it, I think that there will be this healthier thing. There will be an appreciation, unlike before, of restaurants and communities. What I'm actually hoping for is people like Rachel, you know, she talks about so many people go into debt and all of this sort of stuff. And maybe people will start realizing that independent restaurants in their neighborhoods won't exist without them. And maybe you could develop some sort of co-op businesses where you contribute to them, so they don't have to go to these rich investors and get all of these things, but they can get through small investors and keep them in the community and keep them as employers in the community. And those sort of things, you know, give me hope for it. But as Rachel says, like, it's not going to be without pain. And we've faced a lot of pain in the last, you know, 6 months from all sides, and all businesses are. But I do see the other side of it. If places, and again, if places can get through that, they, you know, people like Rachel, like, they're smart and they're driven and they're ambitious and they can adapt, and those people, you know, will make it, and we'll be able to appreciate those places a whole lot more. Yeah.
I see you to call me and like pump me up every morning. Just like that.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
I'll do it. We'll just listen to some music.
Yeah. I was telling Kevin earlier, I was like, I listen to Soundgarden all day. I don't know what that means, but it was like a very like go get 'em type playlist day.
On Black Days.
Yeah, fell on Black Days, exactly. Yeah. I just want to talk kind of quickly on that. God, there's so much to say. Kevin touched on a lot of it, and I really like what you said about the co-op kind of investor idea. I think we have to strip everything down. I mean, that's what a lot of our operations team has been doing this whole time, is going, wow, we were kind of really flying out there with a lot of this stuff. And we've lost people within the management group. We've lost some people at the store level. And now we're going, how do we do this with like a lot less? And so that's really been a lot of our focus right now. I think I'm fortunate, I get, you know, in what part of the country that we live in. It doesn't seem to be as affected with as many government mandates as what we're seeing on the East and West Coast. But we also never really had maybe the real estate bubble that a lot of the East and West Coast was dealing with. I think a lot about those about those restaurateurs and just business people in those places in the first place. Like, I can call any landlord we have and have like a real life conversation right now, and they want to help us, and they know that they're not going to find anyone very easily to take our place, and so they're more than willing to defer rent and do these things. And some of these bigger cities, it just seems like that's been not a thing for them. I mean, even a few years ago, Danny Meyer completely picked up Union Square Cafe and said, I'm moving this, fuck you, I'm going over here now. So anyway, he was kind of maybe ahead of his time with his thinking, but I pull from that right now. As some of our landlords maybe are being a little difficult, or we're not sure what the future holds, it's kind of driving some of these decisions that we're making. But speaking on Danny Meyer and sort of the wage inequality and how he tried to bridge that gap and also help himself several years ago when he did away with tipping. And I don't know if you read recently, but he said, not doing that anymore. I always thought, you know, I admired the thought, the sentiment with that. But in New York specifically, I feel like there were a lot of people who had trained themselves their entire life to be this career server and be this person. And I see a little of that with what we're dealing with right now. We've explored a billion different pay structures for how do we best help our staff right now. And can we pay the staff minimum wage and do tips? And how does that work? And tip sharing and tip pooling. And honestly, what we found throughout this whole time was that really the people that work in the restaurant industry, in my opinion, are here for a reason. They like the flexibility of working 3 doubles in a row to make their rent and kind of goofing off the rest of the time, or not having that responsibility. And a lot of the people here in Oklahoma City that are in this industry are between the ages of 18 and 35. You know, a lot of them don't have families yet or big responsibilities, but it's been really interesting because I felt like I spent a lot of time during this trying to figure out how to save everyone. And what really, the way to save them, I think, was to just bring the restaurants back and do what we always did, promote this very healthy culture, be there for them, be supportive, and make the restaurants as successful as possible so that they can come in and do what they do. And so that's been really interesting for us kind of along the way. And you know, you mentioned, Kevin, about losing 30% of the restaurants. And there's times I look at that and go, well, kind of opens the doors for us to step up and make it, you know, maybe jump some of these people who we thought were maybe ahead of us before, however you measure that. And what's sad, though, is that a lot of those restaurants that are in that 30% are not your Cheesecake Factories, and they're not your Chili's. They are the little people. They are our friends and our other industry folks. And it's just so hard. There's that paired with how many social justice issues that we have right now and the political climate. It's like we want to help everyone. And for our group specifically, that's always been so important for us, whether it was the LGBTQ plus community or the Black community or, you know, underprivileged kids and education and all these things. But to do that, we have to have money. And we're doing our best to continue to support those things through our actions and not just with our pockets at this point, but it takes both sometimes. And also kind of, you mentioned, Kevin, like saying sort of some of what I'm writing doesn't feel important. Sometimes I feel like what we're doing is not as important as I maybe thought it once was on this level where there's so many other things that are so much more important to me, like ethically and morally and in our lives at this time. But then I'm reminded by the 200 and however many people that work for us right now that this is important, and by the people who are in the neighborhoods around us, and seeing them come together kind of, it gives me hope for a lot of these things. So.
All right. Well, we are running out of time. Is there anything else you guys would like to throw out there or add before we disembark here?
Well, if you've managed to last this whole time, congratulations. Thanks, Mom. I would say, if you lasted, and I would love to give you a copy of the book. I'm giving them away free to anyone in the restaurant industry, students, anyone who made it all the way through this or not. And I'm doing it through independent bookstores. So I'm going to give them away through Magic City. I want to give away at least 100, so you can tell your friends. You can send me a text on Instagram at Kevin Alexander Writes, or Kevin Alexander Writes at Gmail. You can email me and you just hit me up with your address, and I'll make sure they send out a book for you. But yeah, I mean, I really appreciate, you know, everyone taking time. These are important things, and it's really cool to be able to talk with people like Rachel, who's so thoughtful about this sort of a thing. And I just think, I'm just hopeful that maybe, you know, in the future, there will be some sort of reward structure set up to incentivize positive change in the restaurant industry. And, you know, I'm hopeful for that sort of thing. I'm trying to be optimistic, and, you know, and it's okay to not always be optimistic. And it's okay to, you know, to feel like things aren't always going well, because they're not. But you know what? Like, this will end and we will figure out. And if I've learned anything from writing this book, it's the people in this industry adapt and figure things out better than anyone in any other industry I've ever seen. And so I'm hopeful for that. So anyway, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel?
I don't have a lot to say, believe it or not, but kind of on that note, I still don't have one tattoo. You probably can't see it, but it does say "figure it out" right there. Again, that's sort of our mentality, but we could use your help just visiting our stores and kind of spreading the word about those. If you're in Tulsa, the Empire Tulsa location is going to reopen. We get a lot of messages, which I hate, to continue to say we're not sure, but it is coming. I do feel like we've made some steps towards getting that reopened in the near future. We have a few more stores to tackle here in OKC sort of at the same time. So thanks for all your support along the way. And yeah, just take care of yourselves out there, and let's be good humans, and hope to see everybody on the other side of all this. So.
All right. Well, thank you both for your time and sharing your insights into the industry and where you're headed. And I wish both of you the best of luck, and can't wait for Empire Slice to open in Tulsa. I would say reopen, but barely got open. So I'm really excited for that yeah, I know. All right. Well, I'm excited to have it here, so I don't have to go to Oklahoma City to eat it.
I appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you both. Take care.
Thank you.
Guys.
Take care.